Okay, can I pull this up? That is so cool. Oops, had a message of some kind. I don't know what it said. All right, so um, you see my screen? We're good? Okay. All right. Oh, what is that thing? Hold on a second. I gotta get something out the way. That better? Okay. Oh, and then where the heck am I? I am lost. Okay. Here we go. Good, it works. All right. So chapter 22. If you remember at the end of chapter 21, we had the situation where David has actually gone over to Philistine land, and oh, somebody's trying to get in. Jackie. Cool, thank you. And so he talks to Achish, the king of Gath, not exactly realizing who David is because his word of his greatness has spread, and of course he's also the person that killed off their big warrior, Goliath. So they realize that they think he's crazy and to somebody else. And so what's happening is basically is David is now in this transition period of becoming king. It's not just the mere fact that he's running away from Saul, but he's starting to slowly, and we'll see that in the next couple of chapters, build up his own army. It's like they're a guerrilla unit, really. Build up his own army, and he's gonna be going after and gaining a priest for his own kingship, and um, even wives. We'll see here in just a little bit, and then those kind of things. And so, and it shows how he's really strong, in a sense, manipulative in the way that he handles the Philistines, and slowly gathers more and more individuals through the skirmishes. They get experience in fighting. So that's what we're going to kind of see as we move along. So David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. Now I had a map, and I'm just not sure what that sucker is going to look like. So hold on a second. So I think this is the first one, and I wasn't crazy about this map. But he starts to run towards the south, and a lot of this is David. Jonathan runs down to meet him from Talia. We're going to see this in a minute. I probably should have had it set to show you more afterwards, actually. Saul and his men from Gibeah to the wilderness of Moab. So Gibeah's way on top. And then, of course, the wilderness of Ziph and the wilderness of Maon. And that's where they're all basically running to. And then they have some issues that go on. Later in a couple chapters, we'll talk about the Rock of Escape. And it's a place where David and Saul have some words. It's rather interesting viewpoint to reflect on when we get there. So in the meantime, let's just go through some good old storylines here and see what happens. So David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and the rest of his family heard about it, they came down to him there. He was joined by all those in difficulties or in debt or embittered. See, all the poor, all the marginalized are coming this way, and he became their leader. And it says here, about 400 men were with him, and so we'll see that number go up. So from there, David went to Mispeth and of Moab, and said to the king of Moab, "Let my father and mother stay with you." And listen, well, hold on a second here. The king of Moab, they don't give his name, I don't think, do they? It is mentioned Moab, and Moab is a territory directly east of the Dead Sea, going the other direction, not towards the Mediterranean, and bounded by Aaron and Zered rivers. A Semitic people inhabited the region, mainly through the Bible. I was trying to find something else in here. Can't seem to find it. But anyways, so they're not really part of the Philistines. So from there, David went there, and he said to the king of Moab, "Let my father and mother stay with you until I learn what God will do for me." And it's important. We kind of take it. Sometimes we don't pay attention to the language, and so we see how David's talking, and he says, "Wait until I learn what God will do for me." He's basically saying, "Wait until what God has me do." It's not like God's going to give him whatever he wants, but let's see how God's plan is going to work out. And so David's faith is always with his Lord. He left them with the king, and then they stayed with him as long as David remained in the stronghold, or where they were hanging out at. A bunch of guerrillas here, basically, just trying to stay hidden for a little while. But Gad the prophet said to David, "Do not remain in the stronghold. You need to leave, go to the land of Judah." And so we're going to take off and go another route, and Judah's in the south. And so David left and went to the forest of Hereth. I did have part of that in the map. It's worth looking at one more time. Hereth is up here in the middle. And this is where he defends against the Philistines. And so that's why he was called up into that direction, coming down from the wilderness area up into this way. Okay. Go back to here. So Doeg, remember Doeg? He's the one that was in the very last part of chapter 21, I think, wasn't it? Or no, not chapter 21. Hold on.
See, it's freezing on me.
Oh,
are you on the internet?
Are you back
it's
on
freezing
again?
On me.
We can hear you though.
What's it usually do?
He goes here and he meets this guy who's an Edomite. He's not even one of the Hebrew people. He's but he does work with Saul, this chief of Saul's shepherds, but yet he's a foreigner. So keep that in mind here. Okay, let's go back down. Are you up and running, Linda? Okay. So Doeg betrays Ahimelech. Now Ahimelech's the one that helped David here. We just saw last week. He is from the what town was he from? The son of Ahitub. Oh, that's right. He's a descendant of Eli, the priest, and so Ahimelech is also a priest as well. Now Saul heard that David and his men had been located. So at that time, he was sitting in Gibeah, because that's where Saul sits, under a tamarisk tree. I'm not sure why that's important to tell us a tamarisk tree. It's a tree that's found in the wilderness, long, feathery branches, that kind of thing, on a high place, holding his spear while all his servants stood by him. Now, it's an image, but it's kind of an important image, because as we know, Saul is pretty much lost it at this point. And he's very angry. So you want to see that imagery when they wrote the scripture of him holding a spear, ready to use it whenever he finally gets to see David. So he said to him, "Listen, men of Benjamin," because that's the area they're from, "will the son of Jesse give all of you fields and vineyards?" You're talking about David. He's the son of Jesse, right? "Will he appoint any of you an officer over 1,000 or 100 men?" In other words, give you important positions. "Have conspired against him?" Hello. Can you still hear me? With my, okay, I guess I was having a little trouble here too. Hold on. Okay. Give me a thumbs up. Jackie, can y'all hear me? Okay. I don't know where my sound went. So at this point, it says, "Why have you all conspired against me?" So obviously Saul's now reached the level of paranoia. "Why have no one told me that my son had yet a pact with the son of Jesse?" Again, had a pact with David. "None of you has shown compassion for me by revealing to me that my son has incited my servant to ambush me, as is the case today." So here it is that he's thinking nobody respects him anymore, and they probably don't. And you're going to see some more examples of that by his own people. And then so Doeg the Edomite, who stands with Saul's officers, spoke up, and he's a tattletale. He says, "I saw the son of Jesse come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, and Nob, and he consulted the Lord for him, furnished him with provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine." Remember when David went to go see him, and he gave him that bread to eat? That was that show bread that was left over. Usually only a priest can have that. And we're going to see again another example how David is, in a sense, priest, prophet, and king. And that's why there's such a strong relation when you see Jesus go down the road and they say, "Hey, there's the son of David." And they skip about a ton of people before they get all the way to David, but David is the reference. Even in the New Testament, the example that we see in comparison with Jesus. So let's see here. Okay, go to so the king summoned Ahimelech, the priest, son of Ahitub, and all his family, and the priest and Nob, and they all came to the king. Did I skip part of this? Oh yeah, no, I didn't, did I? I saw him. Okay, yeah, okay. So they all came to the king. Listen, son of Ahitub, Saul declared. And he says, yes, my lord. He says, Saul questioned him, why have you conspired against me with the son of Jesse by giving him food and a sword, by consulting God for him, that he might rise up against me in ambush, as is the case today? So he turns his words around like David's going to ambush him. Because again, paranoia has set in. He might think that David would attack him. He knows how great of a warrior that David is, and everybody likes him. So Ahimelech says, who among all your servants is as loyal as David, the king of the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, honored in your own house? Is this the first time I have consulted God for him? No, indeed. Not the king accuse his servant or anyone in my family of such a thing. Your servant knows nothing at all, great or small, about the whole matter. So Ahimelech is just saying, what's wrong with David? I thought he was, well liked by you and a great servant, and you gave him all these great responsibilities. Have I done anything wrong here? But of course, with a madman, it's a little bit hard to, work on reason. But the king said, you shall certainly die, Ahimelech, with all your family. Well, that's nice, isn't it? So the king then commanded his guards, his own guards that are standing by him, turn and kill the priests of the Lord, for they gave David a hand. They knew he was a fugitive and yet failed to inform me. So he looks at his own guards to do this, but what happens is that king's servants refuse to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. It's just not something you do, and especially against the priesthood set up by God and Moses, if you will. You don't sit there and just go, okay, what have they done wrong? You start stabbing them. So they decided to not do anything at all. So the king therefore commanded Doeg, you turn and kill the priest. Well, he's a foreigner anyways. What does he care about a lot of this stuff? So Doeg the Edomite himself turned and killed the priests that day, and it says 85 of them, who all wore the linen ephod, because they're all priests. And we see a time later on when something like this happens, much later when we get to some of the other books. So Saul also put the priestly city of Nob to the sword, including men and women, children and infants, oxen, donkeys, and sheep. And what's really interesting is to look at this and go, I saw God, we've seen God do the same thing. So, what's the difference? Well, it's a big difference. One is it's God by God's instruction and wisdom, and the other one's just by a madman. Secondly, God owns everything. He owns life. So at that point, God can choose which life continues and which lives don't. But in this case, Saul does not have that authority in any way, shape, or form. I had one more map. I don't know if it's going to, let's see if I can get it up here. I thought I had it with Nob. Where's Nob? I guess I don't have it up here. Well, bummer. Okay, never mind. I think I had the wrong one. But they're traveling a great deal. What's going to happen is David's going to go through all this area from Enged up to Horesh and everything else, but we'll get there in a minute. Let's just go back to the scripture. Okay. So Abiathar escapes. Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, gives you that lineage, which is always important in scripture, escaped and fled to David. And when Abiathar told David that Saul had slain the priest of the Lord, David knew that happened because of what David did, in the sense that he went there seeking refuge and getting help from Ahimelech and everything else. So he feels guilty about this. I knew that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would certainly tell Saul, I'm responsible for the slaughter of all your family. Stay with me, do not be afraid. Whoever seeks your life must seek my life also. You're under my protection. So he's basically saying, you're going to stay with me. And now he's gained a priest, if you will, for his kingdom that's about to come about as well. And I had a notation here for some reason. Let's see. You're under my protection. Once again, a sharp contrast is drawn between Saul, who kills the Lord's priest, and David, who protects the lone survivor. So just kind of giving you that little example of what's going on between the two. And that's chapter 22. So let's go to chapter 23. Okay, Keilah liberated. David was informed that the Philistines were attacking Keilah and plundering the threshing floors. So he consulted the Lord, and in doing so, he said, "Shall I go and attack these Philistines?" Because David has really got the purpose of staying alive and in trying to maybe build up his own army and then eventually take the kingdom. But now he's thinking, I have a responsibility. If I'm going to be king, I should be protecting the kingdom from the Philistines as well. So the Lord responds to him and says, "Go attack them and free Keilah." But David's men said to him, "Even in Judah, we have reason to fear. How much more so if we go to Keilah against the forces of the Philistines?" In other words, we got this problem to worry about, and now you want to go worry about this problem. And if we go fight, there might be less of us when it's over. So we're going to need everybody we need to have in hand in case we have to go run up against Saul. But again, David consults the Lord, who answered him, "Go down to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into your power." So that's it. David will listen to God, and they will be successful. So David went with his men to Keilah and fought against the Philistines. Okay, he drove off their cattle, inflicted severe defeat on them, and freed the inhabitants of Keilah, because they were taking over again a town that was not theirs. It's in the hill country of Judah, so down in the southern area. Okay. So Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, who had fled to David, went down with David to Keilah, taking the ephod with him. In other words, that's just a little verse in here. It's just trying to stipulate David now has a priest at his hand. All right. Now they fly from Keilah. When Saul was told that David had entered Keilah, he thought, "God has put him in my hand, for he has boxed himself in, entering a city with gates and bars." And so it must have been a very high wall area. He's in there, and Saul must not be extremely far off, or maybe Saul's hoping if he stays in there, he's not getting out. Saul then called all the army to war, and in order to go down to Keilah and besiege David and his men. When David found out that Saul was planning to harm him, he said to the priest, Abiathar, "Bring the ephod here." So David understands and respects the priesthood and what they use in that priesthood. And again, this is what they use to help make decisions. So it says, "Lord God of Israel," David prays, "your servant has heard that Saul plans to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account." Because that's what Saul would do. He wouldn't be worried about as much as just taking care of David, but he'd be so angry that he would consider the town of Keilah to, defend David, that he would just take the whole city down, more or less like he did at Nob when he destroyed everything there. Will they hand me over? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? Lord God of Israel, tell your servant. So the Lord responds and says he will come down. So, okay, it's like, great. Okay, so what happens next? So David then asked, "Will the citizens of Keilah deliver me and my men into the hand of Saul?" The Lord said, "Yeah, they will deliver you." In other words, it's like, hey, we're not going to die. We appreciate what you did, but what's it all to it if we all die? So, yeah, we'll kind of throw David out, outside the gate. So instead of that happening, David and his men, about 600 in number, left Keilah and wandered from place to place. When Saul was informed that David had fled from Keilah, he did not go forth. In other words, he just stopped pursuing him for a short time. All right. So David and Jonathan and Horesh. David now lived in the strongholds of the wilderness, or in the barren hill country of Ziph. And that was part of that mountain where I was trying to show you in that map. Which is down in this area here, further down. Oh, I'm sorry, Ziph. Further right about here. Okay. And so though Saul sought him continually, the Lord did not deliver David into his hand. While David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh, he was afraid that Saul had come out to seek his life. Then Saul's son, Jonathan, came down to David at Horesh. And this is interesting dialogue here. He said to him, "Have no fear, my father Saul shall not lay a hand to you. You shall be king of Israel, and I shall be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this." So the two of them made a covenant before the Lord in Horesh, where David remained while Jonathan returned home. And I think that's the last time that they're actually together in this life, before Jonathan dies with his father. So treachery of the Ziphites. Some of the Ziphites went up to Saul in Gibeah and said, David is hiding among us in the strongholds of Horesh on the hill of Hakilah south of Jeshom. There'll be a test later for just the spelling alone of these names. Okay. Therefore, whenever the king wishes to come down, let him do so. It will be our task to deliver him into the king's hand. So Saul replies to all this, the Lord bless you for your compassion towards me. Go now and make sure once more, take note of the place where he sets foot, for I am told that he is very cunning. In other words, every time he travels somewhere, because it can take a couple days easily from where they're going. Like this time, make sure he's there before I head all the way out there. Take note, and he's very cunning. Look around and learn in which of all of the various hiding places he is holding out. Then come back to me with reliable information, and I will go with you. If he is in the region, I will track him down out of all the families of Judah. I guess Saul's getting a little tired of all this traveling. So they went off to Ziph ahead of Saul, and at this time, and scroll up, David and his men were in the wilderness below Maol, in the Arabah south of the wasteland. And I had another map of that too. Does it show that on here? No, it's the other one, I think. So there's Jeshon. We're talking about Jeshimon, and it doesn't have it listed on here. Come on, scroll it down a little bit. There it is, Arabah, up in this area. That's what they're talking about. Okay. Anywho, you can see where everything's happening in this one section. Israel is a little bit bigger than all that, but just kind of hanging out there for now. When Saul and his men came looking for him, David got word of it and went down to the gorge of the wilderness below Mahon. Saul heard of this and pursued David into the wilderness. As Saul moved along one side of the gorge, David and his men took the other. So in other words, it's kind of a gorge where you really can't pass over each other. You have to kind of, like you're chasing somebody around a table, I guess, and you got to go one way or the other. You just can't necessarily go through per se. And so there's a way that they can be close to each other without having the ability to actually encounter each other. So let's see, where was I at? As Saul moved along one side of the gorge, David and his men took the other. And David was anxious to escape Saul because he's like so close to him and he really wants to kill him. While Saul and his men were trying to outflank David and his men in order to capture them, a messenger comes along to Saul and goes, you got to come quickly because the Philistines have invaded the land. In other words, even God's using the Philistines to help David. So the Philistines are attacking and Saul's got to make a choice. So he interrupts his pursuit of David and went to meet the Philistines. And this is how that place came to be called the Rock of Divisions. Okay? 23. All right. On to 24. They go kind of fast. And it's just a lot of Saul pursuing David and David building up his kingdom in this whole process. So David spares Saul. And I made a notation of this for some reason. Let's see. The first two accounts in which David spares Saul's life. The two accounts which did not make reference to each other are probably alternative versions of the same story. I've heard of that as well. What we're about to hear is an opportunity that David has to actually kill Saul. Doesn't do it. And there's another one a little bit further down, and they kind of wonder if they're not just basically built off of the same story. So David then went up from there and stayed in the strongholds of En-Gedi. When Saul returned from the pursuit of the Philistines, and he was told that David was in the desert near En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 of his best men from all Israel and went in search of David and his men, and in the direction of the Wild Goat Crags, whatever that is. When he came to the sheepfolds along the way, he found a cave, which he entered to relieve himself. And yes, that's what that means. So, hey, you find a cave, that's what you do, right? I don't know. Not enough trees around, maybe. I don't know. Okay. Family show. So David and his men were occupying the inmost recesses of the cave. So isn't that kind of crazy when you think about it? Not the relief part, but I mean the fact that here it is, you come across a cave, you're chasing down David and all these men, and you're telling everybody else, I'll be back in a minute, I'm going to step into this cave, not knowing that there's tons of people in the back of it, and, and this is what's happening. So um, David's servant said to him, hey, Dave, this is the day about which the Lord said to you, I will deliver your enemy into your hand. Do with him as you see fit. And David's kind of thinking, yeah, I could take care of this right now. So he stealthily cut off, he moves up to him and stealthily cut off an end of Saul's robe. So I guess Saul had no clue what was going on, but he sneaks up behind him and slices off a part of his clothing. And afterward, however, David regretted that he had cut off an end of Saul's robe. David will be faithful, even if Saul's not. So nor did he not go through with killing Saul. He did take a piece of his clothing, and yet even that makes him feel regretful for even doing something of that nature against someone who is considered his king, anointed, chosen, by Samuel and God for him to be king. So what's David's right to do this? So he said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, and the Lord's anointed to lay a hand on him, for he is the Lord's anointed. All right. With these words, David restrained from his men and would not permit them to attack Saul. In other words, y'all just be quiet, let Saul go on his way. So Saul then leaves the cave and went on his way and left all the magazines behind. No, just kidding. David also stepped out to the cave, calling to Saul, my Lord, the king. So now David's going, I'm going to talk to him and tell him what's going on. When Saul looked back, David bowed his face to the ground in homage and asked Saul, why do you listen to those who say David is trying to harm you? You see for yourself today that the Lord just now delivered you into my hand in the cave. I was told to kill you, but I took pity on you instead. So I decided I will not raise a hand against my master, for he is the Lord's anointed. Look here, my father. See the end of your robe, which I hold. Look, he calls him father, for crying out loud. He's showing a great respect for Saul. Now, of course, if Saul said, if you respect me so much, come here and get really close, David would probably go, okay. So look here, my father. See the end of your robe, which I hold. I cut off an end of your robe and did not kill you. Now see and be convinced that I planned no harm and no rebellion. Basically, Saul, I'm not a threat to you. I have done no wrong, though you are hunting me down and to take my life. And scroll up. May the Lord, the judge between me and you, may the Lord exact justice for you in my case. I shall not lay a hand on you. As the old proverb says, from the wicked comes wickedness. Thus I will not lay a hand on you. What is the king of Israel attacking? What are you pursuing? A dead dog? A single flea? The Lord will be the judge to decide between us. May the Lord see this, defend my cause, and give me justice against you. So he's like, Saul, you really got to understand what's going on here. I'm not the problem. I am truly not the problem. So Saul's remorse. So when David finished saying all these things to Saul, Saul responds, is that your voice, my son David? So again, the strong relationship, everything just seems so crazy, right? And he wept freely. So Saul basically just cries over this whole issue. Saul knows his sinfulness. He knows that he misses the presence of God being placed upon him. And he just doesn't want to let go of what used to be his, was now David's, but of course in time for David to become rightfully in his place on the throne. So Saul then admitted to David, kind of a long text area, so bear with me. You are more in the right than I am. You have treated me graciously while I have treated you badly. You have declared this day how you treated me graciously. The Lord delivered me into your hand and you did not kill me. For if someone comes upon an enemy, do they send them graciously on their way? So may the Lord reward you graciously for what you have done this day. And now, since I know that you will certainly become king, and that the kingship over Israel shall come into your possession, swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants, and that you will not blot out my name from my father's house. So David gave Saul his oath, and Saul returned home, while David and his men went up to the stronghold where they're hanging out at. So, what you're seeing is that Saul is admitting at this point, not that he hasn't done it before, because we still got some other issues that are going to be coming down the pike. But Saul is just basically just in total confusion about how to handle all this situation between his own desires, his own selfishness, and what God wants, and then realizing also how great David really is. And I'm sure he wishes he could be as great as David. Okay, we're moving right along. We might get done early. Okay, chapter 25, the death of Samuel. You remember, all the things that happened with Samuel. Samuel was pretty old. So at this point, Samuel dies, and all of Israel is gathered to mourn him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Remember, that's where he was from, and all of his family, and his mom, Hannah, and all that. Then David went down to the wilderness of Paran. So it doesn't give a lot of detail, but it's just you're only talking about one verse of Samuel's death and the response to it. Maybe at this point in time, David was, because it does say they buried him in his home. Then David went down to the wilderness. It could have been a chance that Saul and David were both there. It doesn't say if they were both there to see Samuel, his funeral, his burial, and that kind of thing or not. So kind of like one of those stories where the enemies come together to have a moment of peace before they go back to what they were doing. Nabal and Abigail. There was a man, this is an interesting story. It's almost like a sideline story, but it has a purposeful ending. There was a man of Maon who had property in Carmel, just south of here, Shreveport. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, I'm sorry. He was wealthy, owning 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. A man has a lot of goats, you're wealthy. At the time, he was present for the shearing of his flock in Carmel. The man's name was Nabal, I think actually, and his wife was Abigail. The woman was intelligent and attractive, but Nabal, a Kaleobite, and that's basically, let's see, it's more defined by, doesn't say much about what that means as far as locations and the like. It's more of a defining of what kind of personality that he is. Anyways, he was harsh and bad-mannered. Okay. While in the wilderness, David heard that Nabal was shearing his flock. So he sent 10 young men, instructing them, go up to Carmel, pay Nabal a visit, and greet him in my name, and say to him, peace be with you, my brother, and with your family, and with all who belong to you. I have just heard that your shearers are with you. Now, when your shepherds were here with us, because there was a time when his shepherds and David and all his crew were there, he did them no injury, and neither did they miss anything where they were in Carmel. In other words, we did them no harm, took nothing from them. We could have did that. We didn't. We actually protected them. We did them no injury, neither did they miss anything while they were in Carmel. Ask your servants, and they will tell you, look kindly on these young men, since we come at a festival time. Please give your servants your son David whatever you can. So, we are very good to you and your people and everything else. Can you help us out a little bit? It'd be great. When David's young men arrived, they delivered the entire message to Nabal in David's name. Well, you can imagine after the description of who he is, how this is going to turn out. But Nabal answered the servants of David and said, who is David? Oh, come on. He knows who David is. Who's the son of Jesse? Nowadays, there are many servants who run away from their masters. And so he definitely knows who David is, because David ran away from Saul. Must I take my bread, my wine, my meat that I have slaughtered from my own shears and give them to men who come from who knows where? He's basically being selfish. So David's young men retraced their steps and returned and reported all this back to David. Thereupon David said, let me scroll up, oops, let everyone strap on his sword. Oh, so David's going, okay, be that way. I'll come see you. And everyone did so, and David put on his own sword, and about 400 men went up after, and 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage, because you don't want anybody to steal your baggage, right? Abigail, Nabal's wife, was informed of this, and one of his servants, who said, scroll up, from the wilderness, David sent messengers to greet our master, but he screamed at them. Yet these men were very good to us. We were not harmed, neither did we miss anything all the while we were living among them during our stay in the open country, because they're, sheep herders. Day and night they were a wall of protection for us. The whole time we were pasturing the sheep near them. Now, basically, they're kind of close to the Philistine territory, so that's what he meant by, they didn't have to worry about any of that kind of thing happening. And he says, now see what you can do, for you must realize that otherwise disaster is in store for our master and for his whole house. He's such a scoundrel, talking about Nabal, that no one can talk to him. So Abigail thinks quickly and got together 200 loaves, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of pressed raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. She then said to her servants, go on ahead and I'll follow you. So in other words, let the tribute that you're bringing to David go first. They're less likely to start, throwing arrows and throwing their swords around. And but to her husband Nabal, say nothing. Don't tell him, because he'll have a fit. So she came down riding on a donkey, and David and his men are coming down from the opposite direction. I think it's a nice little metaphor of here she comes to, save her people by riding on a donkey. Sound kind of familiar? So again, David and his men were coming down from the opposite direction. When she met them, David had just been saying, indeed, it was in vain that I guarded all this man's possessions in the wilderness, so that nothing of his was missing. Now has repaid good with evil. May God do thus to David and more, if by morning I leave a single male alive among all those who belong to him. That kind of same language we've already heard twice before, where I think Saul said it, and of course even was it Samuel that even said it at one time, I believe. No, Eli actually said it, like, tell me everything, lest it be done, to you. So as soon as Abigail saw David, she dismounted quickly from the donkey, and falling down, bowed low to the ground before David in homage. As she fell at his feet, she said the following. As you can see how kind of long this is. My Lord, let the blame be mine. Please let your maidservant speak to you. Listen to the words of your maidservant. My Lord, do not pay any attention to that scoundrel Nabal, for he is just like his name. His name means fool, and he acts the fool. I, your maidservant, did not see the young men whom my Lord sent. Now, therefore, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as you live, the Lord has kept you from shedding blood and from avenging yourself by your own hand. May your enemies and those who seek to harm my Lord become as Nabal, or a fool. Accept this gift, then, which your maidservant has brought for my Lord, and let it be given to the Lord. Let it be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the offense of your maidservant, for the Lord shall certainly establish a lasting house for my Lord. Because of my Lord fights the battles of the Lord. Let no evil be found in you your whole life long. If any adversary pursues you to seek your life, may the life of my Lord be bound in the bundle of the living, in the care of the Lord your God. It's a long lamentation, basically, of saying how great, how awful her husband is, and how great David is. And so may God hurl out the lives of your enemies as far as from the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord fulfills, my Lord, the promise of success he has made concerning you, and appoints you as a ruler over Israel, you shall not have any regrets or burdens on your conscience, my Lord, for having shed innocent blood or for having rescued yourself. When the Lord bestows good on my Lord, remember your maidservant. Whew. That's a long, it's a long lamentation of and of course David responds. So David goes, okay, says to Abigail, blessed is the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to meet me today. Blessed is your good judgment, and blessed are you yourself. Today you have prevented me from shedding blood and rescuing myself with my own hand. Otherwise, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come so promptly to meet me, by dawn Nabal would have not had so much as one male left alive. So he's saying, it's a good thing you came along, because we're ready to do some damage. So David then took from her what she had brought for him, and said to her, go to your home in peace. See, I have listened to your appeal and have granted your request. Now, look who dies. Go figure, right? Okay. So she goes back to her husband. He was hosting a banquet, and I'm sure only inviting his friends, in his house, like that of a king. In other words, he's got plenty. He's just not sharing. So Nabal was in a festive mood and very drunk. So she said not a word to him until daybreak the next morning. But then when Nabal was sober, his wife told him what had happened. And at this, his heart died within, and he became like a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. So it doesn't say much about exactly how that happened, but what you find is that he just felt so disheartened because she did something that he didn't want her to do. Also, he feels bad too because he almost got his whole kingdom destroyed through his selfishness. Just like his whole spirit just kind of left him. And then 10 days later, probably from stress and depression and anxiety, whatever it might be, just eventually he just passed away from all that. So how convenient this is for David, though. So hearing that Nabal was dead, David said, "Blessed be the Lord, who has defended my cause against the insult on Nabal, and who restrained his servant from doing evil, but has repaid Nabal for his evil deeds." So look what happens next. David then sent a proposal of marriage to Abigail. I'm not sure if the body's even cold yet. It could have been some time, but it couldn't have been a really long stretch time between when he dies and he actually approaches her. And you remember the description of her. She's very intelligent and beautiful, and very forthright as well, and takes a great deal of what's the word I'm looking for? Fortitude to do with it. She did against her own house, knowing it was best for the house. Kind of like David's doing with Saul, Okay, so David proposes marriage, and David's servants came to Abigail and Carmel, and they said to her, "David has sent us to make his proposal of marriage to you." Now, how romantic is that? I'm going to go ahead and send an entourage to go ahead and ask if you'll be my wife. Maybe he's just really shy. I don't know. But you're also thinking, what about Michal? Well, we're going to see in a little bit about what happened with that situation. So David, let's see, David has sent us. Rising and bowing to the ground, she answered, "Let your maidservant be the slave who washes the feet of my Lord's servants." Well, she could have said yes, but, very dramatic, right? She got up immediately, mounted a donkey, and followed David's messengers with her five maids attending her. She became his wife, and David also, just in the next verse, David also married Ahinoam of Jezreel. And there's some history about Jezreel as we get further in to Kings, especially with Elijah. Thus, both of them were his wives. But Saul, and this answers a question you might have had if you didn't read ahead, Saul gave David's wife, Michal, Saul's own daughter, to Palti, son of Laish, who was from Galim. And I don't think there's really a whole lot on it. I don't think I can find a map of where that is or anything else. I looked this up earlier and I just couldn't find much on it. Just mentioned it. I think this is probably the only place you're going to find it mentioned in Scripture, to be honest. And Palti, it says, son of Raphu, one of the 12 spies. No, that's not the same Palti. That's even a different Palti. So who knows? Who's Laish? Let's see, Laish, the city in northern Canaan. Oh, wow. Way up there. But that's the name of a person. So, okay. Well, it is 7:55, so I guess we did okay.